Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Good morning to you. Good afternoon to anyone who might be joining virtually. We're going to discuss ProHealthcare's experience over the last few years to develop a mature capital replacement program. So the agenda today that we want to cover is we'll start with a little introduction about myself. We'll get into who is ProHealthcare. We'll then dive into replacement plans as a whole. And then start peeling back the layers of our evolution at ProHealthcare for our replacement plan. And then we'll follow up, excuse me, with some lessons learned. So first, let's start with an introduction. As you heard, my name is Lonnie Bartkowiak. I am a Senior Biomed Project Manager at ProHealthcare. I started with ProHealthcare back in 2015, and I started in the project management office. And it was there that I really started getting a variety of projects, and some of which included medical equipment and also device integration. It was during my time in the project management office that I came to know my current boss, Rob Bundick. And for those of you who know Rob, he is our Director of Biomedical Engineering and Health Technology Management at ProHealthcare. So we'll get into a little more detail of how I got into this role, but in 2019, Rob started looking at how to expand capital planning, really, and wanting to understand how we could accomplish that. So with knowing Rob, somehow he decided that I would be a good fit for a newly created role, and I became the Senior Biomed Project Manager. I will say, prior to this role, I did not have any medical equipment experience. I did not have a clinical background whatsoever. Lessons learned many times, and still, I still might look like a deer in headlights, but at the end of the day, I really do enjoy my job. It's helped me grow both professionally and personally. So I've never regretted making the move. So who is ProHealthcare? We are a community-based nonprofit healthcare system serving Waukesha County. For those of you not familiar with Wisconsin, Waukesha County is right next to Milwaukee County. So we're about 20 minutes west of Milwaukee. As of January this year, we became a 4-hospital system, bringing our total to 384 beds. We have 14 clinics, opening one actually here in the next couple months, and then we're wrapping up design of a retail imaging clinic as well. So we are growing quite a bit. And we also do have some various joint ventures and relationships with other healthcare organizations in the state. A little bit about who our team is and our makeup. So again, we're not just biomedical engineering, but we're also healthcare technology management. So looking at our structure, on the biomed side, we have a supervisor, we have an admin or also a dispatcher, 7 senior biomed techs, 2 imaging techs, 1 imaging associate. And then on the healthcare technology management side, we have a director, a cybersecurity analyst, we have a database analyst, medical device integration engineer, biomedical equipment lifecycle planner, a part procurement specialist, and a senior biomed project manager myself. So let's start getting into replacement plans. So let's start. What is a replacement plan? Sounds kind of like a silly question, right? Probably sounds very simplistic, like my first bullet point, it's a schedule showing when a piece of equipment should be replaced. But it also has the ability to be a tool to help facilitate and support conversation within your organization, and more importantly, to help those senior leaders understand the full financial impact our medical equipment has on our organization. It's also a means to help support other organizational goals and initiatives, and vice versa. So really, when we look at what is a replacement plan, it's all of these things. However, it can be as simplistic or diverse as you would like it to be. So in our industry, most organizations don't have a replacement plan. And why is that? A couple things play into that. Is number one, we have a reactive mindset, right? It's natural in healthcare for us to be reactive. A patient presents to our ED, we react to it. A piece of equipment fails, we react to it. But it's really being proactive in healthcare, or being proactive in healthcare really is a different mindset, and it can be challenging for some to achieve. Another reason why most organizations lack a replacement plan is time and effort. It's not something that you can just set up, ignore, and it'll do its own thing for you. It takes time and attention. It takes effort to put it together. And when you have so many competing priorities or so many things that you're trying to accomplish with your organization, it's hard to give it the time and attention that it truly needs. And probably one of the biggest reasons why organizations lack a replacement plan is because leaderships don't have a good understanding of how expensive not having a replacement plan is. So let's get into some of the benefits. There are many. Let me back up actually. In order to start changing our mindset, we need to understand what the benefits are for having a replacement plan, or possibly multiple ones. While there are many benefits to a replacement plan today, I wanted to cover just a couple of them, what I would consider to be the more common or the obvious benefits. And those are standardization, cost avoidance, and the potential to reduce patient safety events. So standardization, it allows us to consolidate the amount of vendor and model variation you have within your organization. It naturally allows you to have a backup system at your fingertips should a system go down anywhere in your organization. And it also provides you an opportunity to eliminate personal physician preferences of equipment. So there's quite a bit that you can achieve with standardization. Cost avoidance is another one. There are two types of costs associated with every piece of equipment. You have your capital costs, which is your one-time purchase, but you also have operational costs, which are your ongoing costs to support that equipment. A replacement plan affords you the opportunity to negotiate additional savings by leveraging your multi-year replacement plan. You have the ability to negotiate not only your capital expenses, but you also can negotiate your operational expenses like application training or biomed training. We at ProHealthcare, we're an in-house biomed program. So we obviously have a training expense that we need to account for, and we certainly negotiate that where we can. And also, it allows you to negotiate any parts or service contracts that you may have. And lastly, there's the potential to reduce a patient safety event from occurring. So as our equipment gets older, the possibility of it failing increases. And without a replacement plan, the chance of a patient safety event occurring increases. Having conversations with your clinical leaders and your biomed engineers helps you understand the health of your equipment, the risks it potentially poses to your patients, and help set the priority of equipment replacement. So those are some well-known benefits or common benefits, but there's some benefits I wanted to cover that maybe aren't as well known or could even be an unexpected benefit of having a replacement plan. These benefits are just as valuable, if not more in some cases, as commonly known benefits. So we'll start with the first two. I'm going to lump those together. Plans to proceed with senior leadership and improved odds of capital getting approved. We at ProHealthcare, we view our replacement plan as a tool to help facilitate and support conversations. And we're very fortunate in that our senior leaders are open and willing to having conversations around the replacement of our equipment. And I'm sure most of you are in a similar situation where your CFO absolutely loves to know what the financial impact is of the equipment you have on your organization. So each year, without getting into too much detail, each year I provide our senior leaders a 5-year anticipated spend summary of both our imaging and our biomed plans. Sorry, let me fix that. All right. This allows our leaders to not only quickly see the bottom line of what I'm going to be requesting that upcoming fiscal year, but it also allows them to see what I'm projecting to request in the upcoming 4 years. You know what I'm going to do? Bear with me just a moment, guys. I think I am going to switch to just my laptop and see if that helps. All right, are you guys still able to see me okay?
Yes.
Okay. And actually, bear with me just a moment because now it doesn't want to let me see my notes. All right, so I can't see my notes right now, so I'm gonna wing it, guys. Let me see if I can figure this one out. Bear with me just a moment. I apologize, guys. Let me try this one more time. I don't know what happened here. Okay, well, we'll get this one figured out. And bear with me while I do that. Give me 1 second, guys.
So is everybody having a good conference so far?
Yeah.
Elaine's working on it. Fill in for a little bit. No worries. Everybody time, so. Maybe starting, well, I think seeing her notes on her presentation, so she's trying to put that here. So she's turned her camera off a little on that. Very nice. So what's been your favorite part of the conference? Well, first of all, who's been to my conference before? Okay. Who reads like magazine? Who gets a free subscription but doesn't read it? If you want a free subscription and read it or not read it, do that too. Just go to our website, click subscription, that's free, it comes every month. Great advertisements, great articles. If you know of someone we should feature in the magazine, a radiology director or a sonographer or X-ray tech or someone coming up in the industry, the rising star, who you see as someone who has potential to be a director or image leader in the future, we'd love to feature them. If you have a coverage story, a topic or something that's happening in the industry that you think people should be more aware of, or I'm not an imaging person, I'm an editor of the magazine, but I have no idea. I'm not in the hospital every day. I'm not in the imaging center every day. So, you know, it used to drive me crazy when I was at newspapers. People would be like, I can't believe you didn't have to story about this in the newspaper. I'm like, well, I didn't know about it. I mean, you read the newspaper, how come you didn't know? I'm like, I don't like have a chip in my head that automatically I find out. Like, somebody has to tell us. So.
Hey, Lonnie, are you able to hear me?
I can. I'm just trying to figure this out. I'm so sorry. I don't know why it just stopped working all of a sudden.
You are all right. We can see it in notes mode right now.
Yeah, I know, but I don't want it in notes mode for you. And new hardware detected. No. and I don't know how to. It just doesn't like the software for some reason today.
Right. On your end, are you able to see your notes mode?
I'm not.
I'm guessing you have, now we're back in presentation mode.
See, and I don't see that at all.
Do you have multiple
I
monitors?
do. Yep, I do.
So on your webinar, that's not going to help you. So you can say on your webinar dashboard, we can toggle under the show screen option, but that's just selecting which we will see, not which you will see.
Sure. Okay.
Do you have any windows minimized on your computer screens or on your monitor?
Let me try. So you see presentation mode.
We're not in presentation right now. It looks like you could move us into presentation. We have PowerPoint pulled up.
We have
Oh,
the,
interesting.
we have the current slide.
Okay. So you have the PowerPoint presentation. You don't have it with my notes on the right-hand side.
No, we do not. On the bottom of your screen there, now we're in presentation mode.
Okay. So let's just do it this way then. Bear with me. Moving things around. All right. I think is it okay if I leave my camera off since it reversed? So now I'm showing the presentation actually on the screen that I don't have a webcam for.
Okay, if it works for you to where it's more manageable for you to see your slides without the webcam, that is perfectly okay.
Okay. So let's go ahead and continue that way. I'm sorry.
Great.
So, Lainey, if you want to try one more thing real quick, in PowerPoint, under slideshow, there's something called presenter view. If you click on presenter view, that might fix the issue you have. But if you want to turn off your camera and just do the presentation.
Exactly.
Turn off my camera. What did he say?
If you'll go back to the view that you were in, we can turn off your camera in the interest of time and what you're comfortable with. That's perfectly okay.
Okay, sounds good. Then we'll just proceed where I'm at.
All right. I'm gonna make one bigger. All right, Lonnie, whenever you're ready, you're welcome to pick it up.
All right, let's try this all again. I'm sorry, guys and ladies in the room. So let's get back to planting the seed with your senior leadership and improving your odds of capital getting approved. So going back to each year, I'm providing our senior leaders with a 5-year anticipated spend summary. And again, I do this for both our imaging plans and our biomed plans. And what it does is it allows our leaders to not only quickly see the bottom line of what I will be requesting for the upcoming fiscal year, it also allows them to see what I'm projecting to request each of the next 4 years. So you might be wondering why would we even do this? We as an organization, we have a lot of competing priorities, which means we also have a lot of competing capital asks. And by giving our senior leaders insight into what that next 4 years looks like, the medical equipment replacements we are preparing them for, we're preparing them for what is to come, right? But more importantly, they've now seen the summaries, they know what I'm going to be asking for, and they're mentally starting to plan and anticipate that spend for the next 4 years. An example of how the summary has really benefited our organization, like everyone else, the last 2 years with COVID have just, put us all to a spin, and we have so many competing priorities and lots of capital being spent on PPE or things just to support all the changes with COVID that are occurring. When COVID hit, we as an organization really started conserving our dollars. Naturally, ProHealthcare is a very conservative organization, but we became even more conservative in our financial spend. Last spring, when things started to look like they were getting better, and we had already requested the upcoming capital spend, I was actually approached by our CFO, who let me know, hey, Lonnie, because we've been so conservative, we've got some extra dollars, and we see that a lot of people had to bump out a lot of their capital asks for the last year and a half. And so we want to try and bring some of that back. We want to bring it forward, back into fiscal year 21. And they asked if I had a way of spending any of that money based on what I was showing them in my replacement plan. And I'll say I was actually able to get a couple $1 million of my FY22 ask moved into FY21. So I was able to complete some of those replacements a lot sooner than I had anticipated. So another great way to show that value to the leader so they're aware of what's taking place. And lastly, a replacement plan can be a relationship builder. You might be wondering how it could actually work that way, but all good relationships require communication. If we go back to the concept that a replacement plan is a tool to facilitate and support conversation, we can start to connect the dots for how a replacement plan can build relationships. And replacement plans are a partnership between you and the organization's leaders, and they're created with a common goal in mind, patient care. It's also those partnerships that will assist you in achieving goals, initiatives that the organization may have, and vice versa. And we'll get into that a little more later on in the presentation. So the evolution of ProHealthcare. So we're going to get into this guy, add a little humor, but it really does speak to it. So we're going to start off with where we started. We'll then get into Rob's vision, where we are today, and our future. So how did we start? Our replacement planning started with an imaging equipment plan, which makes sense as that's where a large amount of an organization's money is spent. So Dan Blaisdell, who is our biomed supervisor, and Rob Bundick, they worked together to put together a plan with various data elements needed to determine when a piece of equipment should be replaced. And once that plan was in place, they both met with our leaders annually to review and validate whether or not the plan for the upcoming fiscal years still made sense. And it was based on those meetings, adjustments were made to the replacement plan. Perhaps there's a piece of equipment that just had a really rough year, and we've determined it just needs to be replaced sooner than we originally thought. Or maybe because of all the competing priorities, we see that there is a piece of equipment that was slated for the upcoming year, but it's been your workforce and it hasn't had any issues. So maybe we just want to bump that out 1 or 2 years, again, just to adjust for priorities that we have for replacements. So from there, that's when Rob started putting his vision together. The imaging plan was proving to be rather successful for our organization. And if anyone in the room knows Rob, he doesn't like to just stand still. He always is driving forward to improve and get his team to the next level. So we wanted to figure out how we could take the foundation of the imaging plan and expand replacement planning as a whole. And he also wanted to find a way to streamline our planning and capital processes while increasing the likelihood of capital getting approved. And he determined that the best way to accomplish this was to have a dedicated person manage capital planning. So in 2018, Rob started putting together his case to present to leadership about this new role. And in early 2019, Rob got approval for the position. And as I mentioned, I transitioned into the role in April of 2019. So where are we today? We're going to cover a couple things, what we did for building on what we already had in place, and process changes we've put into place, committees that have been created. So starting with building on what we already had in place. Prior to me taking on the role, I did have conversations with Rob. I knew exactly what I was getting into, but it's because of those conversations too, I was able to quickly hit the ground running. And I ended up developing approximately 20 replacement plans for biomed equipment. So things like clinic exam tables, OR tables, EKG machines, suction regulators, pulse ox, nebulizers, quite a few different modalities of biomed equipment. And what we did is we took the same principles from our imaging replacement plan to build our biomed replacement plans. We gathered our inventory data. We defined what data elements we wanted to use to determine our replacement years, and we mapped out our plan. One addition that we did make, though, to our imaging plan was creating a multi-year summary, which I briefly mentioned earlier, and it was showing the total projected spend per modality, the overall projected annual spend, the quantity of units making up each modality spend, as well as some key pieces of information we wanted leaders to be aware of for each modality. And we found the summary page not only provided leadership an overview of our multi-year plan, but it also provided them just enough detail to show them we're having thoughtful conversations with our clinical leaders and doing our due diligence to map out when is it appropriate to replace a piece of equipment. We later did this for our biomed plan as well, the summary and the breakout of modality, cost, and quantity. So let's start getting into some of those process changes. First is our centralized capital request process. So historically in Pro Healthcare, even back when we had our first replacement plan, the responsibility of requesting capital, that fell to each individual department or clinic leader to do. And this had caused a couple of negative outcomes. First, we were relying on leaders to request the capital, and to be honest, it didn't happen. It didn't always happen. Other priorities took their attention away from replacing equipment, and soon we found ourselves with a lot of aging equipment that was still in use and shouldn't have been. We also noticed there was a lack of consistency with capital approvals. So we could have multiple clinics request capital, but not all of those requests were getting approved. And for the capital that was getting approved, we saw new equipment being purchased that didn't meet our standards, which was problematic for us. And we also were seeing a lot of unnecessary money being spent, all because each leader was making their own purchase rather than leveraging the overall volume or spend with a single vendor. So we knew in order to execute our replacement plan, we needed to make sure capital was being requested and the odds of getting approved were going to increase. To do this, we shifted the capital request process, the request of the replacements, away from each individual leader and made that part of my role. So on an annual basis, I now submit a capital request for each modality's anticipated amount. One thing I do want to point out, though, is that leaders are still responsible for requesting capital for any net new pieces of equipment. I will only request capital for equipment that belongs on a replacement plan. So What we found with this is that very rarely my replacement plan capital is denied. There have been a couple instances in the last 2 years, and I understand that, where finance will actually reach out to me, ask if we have the ability to replace a subset of my app. So, example, for FY22, I requested to replace 3 CTs for our organization. Due to the volume of capital being requested, they had asked if I could replace only 2 of the 3. And knowing what we had available to us to bump out future years, we were able to meet that request from finance. So by centralizing our capital request process, I actually have better control and oversight to ensure we're able to execute on our replacement plans each year. So let's start getting into some of our processes that we created. In 2020, our Director of Purchasing, Leslie Kleba, she created a value analysis coordinator role to focus on our value analysis processes. And because my previous work in the PMO involved demand management, and I also, in my new role, had oversight with replacement plans and helping drive equipment standardization, I was asked to help partner with the value analysis coordinator and create the value analysis framework. So we went to work and we started with identifying what our key issues and barriers were. And those were a lack of a consistent process for not only just requesting itself, but for key stakeholders, trial evaluation and decision making. Key stakeholders not always being identified for the trial and evaluation, financial considerations, and a lack of committee review and approval. So what we needed a more robust intake process. At that time, I hate to say it, but at that time, our request process was merely an operational leader or a provider sending an email to one of our senior buyers and asking for a new piece of equipment or a supply, and typically those were brand new for our organization, something that we didn't have today. We also needed a standardized evaluation process to include both clinical requirements and financial savings. Identifying requirements for a piece of equipment was unheard of outside of the project management office. And typically the only costs people paid attention to were the capital ones. We also wanted a designated champion or multi-designated champion roles. In our organization, it was very much a hot potato mentality, where as soon as that email was sent requesting the equipment or the supply, it was very hands-off, and it was up to purchasing to figure it out and really just let the provider know when it arrived so that they could start using it. And we also needed a method to achieve our financial targets and goals. So why is it important for us to do this work? We at Pro Healthcare, we needed a process to help ensure that the organization was making the best clinical and financial decisions. We couldn't continue with a silo mentality, making decisions by yourself, not involving anyone else, or without understanding the full financial impact of what that purchase means to our organization. Historically, we were seeing some delays in working through the process consistently. And as a result, requests were taking a long time to process, all due to an unidentified process and poor request process. It was not uncommon for a single request to take 6 months to get through our process. And we wanted a goal to adopt one clearly defined process to address this issue and meet the needs of our customers in a timelier manner. So I don't know how large this is for you folks in the room, but I just wanted to briefly review what that framework is that we put in place. So we break this up into 2 phases, if you will. On the left-hand side, you'll see the first two columns are demand management, and the three columns to your right are what we consider a project management phase. So kind of going over high level what each phase is, we have an intake phase. So we really improved our process of understanding what it is that the physician or what the clinical leader was requesting. What were they needing? And what we did is we made sure that they were involved from start to finish. No more of this handoff, hot potato, I'm out, let me know when it comes in mentality. And we started engaging our value analysis committees as well. Once we understood what their demand was, we would then have a subset of us that would meet. It was mainly purchasing folks and also myself that would meet, and we would review the discovery, or I'm sorry, the request. And we would go through a discovery phase, understanding what all needed to happen to make this trial or evaluation work. And we would initiate an RFP, which we're actually going to talk about in a few slides. Once the RFPs were turned back in from our vendors, we went to work performing some cost analysis and product comparison. And based on, again, those requirements to understand what it is clinically that we're trying to achieve and what we need a piece of equipment to do, we were able to slim down the amount of vendors that were going to participate in an evaluation. So once we knew how many vendors we were going to have participate, we then moved into our planning. And really this was the logistics around it. A great example of this is when we did our evaluation for new general OR tables, we ended up with 4 vendors, and each vendor, almost each vendor, had brought in 2 different tables. That evaluation is the sole purpose why we now no longer want more than 3 vendors. We actually try and get it down to 2, but no more 4 vendors. And we go through the logistics of it. So we understand working with the vendors, when are they able to bring in their piece of equipment to trial? How long will the trial last? What locations are we going to include in the trial? Making sure all the proper paperwork is signed, all the agreements that are assigned, and any supplies or disposables that are needed also to support that trial. Once we have that all figured out, we then actually do a kickoff meeting that involves both the vendors and the clinical leaders so that everyone understands what is going to happen with this trial, what are the dates around it, which vendors are going to be where on what dates, all of the logistics around this trial to make sure that it goes off without a hitch. And then we start moving into the execution phase where we complete the trial. And once the trial is complete, we reach out to those leaders and ask them to gather the feedback from the clinicians, from the providers, so that we know where they're starting to lean with their selection. And then what we do is we actually put all of this information into what I call a product comparison and summary document, where it outlines some of that feedback. We're able to go back and make sure what we had for requirements and whether or not those vendors truly were able to meet them. But we're also able to see in a snapshot the comparison, both capital expense-wise and operational expense-wise, how each vendor racks and stacks. And then it also affords us the ability to move forward with negotiations. So I'll stop there. I know it's hard for me to hear, but I'll ask, does anyone have any questions in regards to the framework here that I have displayed?
Do you have a Gantt chart that you associate this with?
I don't know. I don't know, but I will say, going back to my comment about how historically it could take 6+ months for a request to make it through its process, we're looking at getting a request done in 90 days or less. And the reason why we selected that is because, number one, the amount of work needing to take place now that we actually wanted, I shouldn't say actually, now that we were being more thorough with our process, but also because you'll notice here there's some boxes that reference a VAC, which is our Value Analysis Committee. That committee, they meet on a quarterly basis, so we wanted to get it done within a quarter. Any other questions? All right. So our results, successes, challenges, we saw it all. I'll go over our OR table evaluation for you just to kind of put some more context around it. So like I stated, we were looking at replacing our general OR tables, and we had a couple different vendors of table in our organization. We wanted to get that down to one vendor, again, trying to drive standardization and ultimately some cost savings. So like I had mentioned, we brought in 4 different vendors, and the trial itself lasted about a month. Each vendor had a week at each location. So at that time, we had 2 of our hospitals where we had surgery taking place. So each vendor again would have 1 week at each location. Then they would flip, and then we would bring in for the second 2-week stint, if you will, we would bring in the other 2 vendors. They would spend a week at one location and then swap so that they could wrap up their evaluation. Once we had completed the trial, we worked with clinical leadership to understand what was that feedback, and we ultimately came down to 2 different vendors that we were going back and forth with for a couple weeks actually. And ultimately what it came down to is the vendor of choice offered opportunities for us outside of just the OR tables. We wanted to be able to leverage some additional cost savings. The vendor that we selected, we also had their table as our robotic table. So we could leverage some savings there with some accessories because they were universal between the 2. And we also used that vendor for some of our booms and lights and things. So we were able to, based off of just the OR table itself, we were able to negotiate a multi-year agreement for other pieces of equipment in our organization that we were purchasing from them. So it was a great way of us utilizing our value analysis process, but then also being able to leverage that selection and that purchase to other cost savings elsewhere within the organization. But we did have some challenges over the last couple of years. So number one is, unfortunately, our value analysis coordinator, she was an RN by nature. She wanted to get back into clinical work, so she has actually left the organization. But also COVID happened, right? So we have not been able to fully implement this process. We have, however, used the framework, like I said, for OR tables, and most recently, we're going to be using this process to trial some ultrasounds for our EP doctors. So we're taking the small wins where we can. So the next steps for us, like I said, because we haven't been able to fully utilize this process, we're hoping in the next year or so that we get this process back on track and we're able to continue utilizing it for decision making. RFP process. So in recent years, we identified a need to improve our RFP process. We were finding purchases, the decisions for purchases being made without understanding what were the requirements that the clinicians or the providers had. Now, me not knowing who's all in the audience, a little information as to what a requirement is. So in the project management world, we use the term requirements. It's really outlining what is the functionality of a system you're needing in order to meet your clinical role or to provide the service that you're providing. Are there also some additional features of that equipment that you're looking for, where maybe it's not a functionality, but it's a feature? You want a touch screen, you want an iPad or a tablet associated with it versus always being in the control room, things like that. So that's what I mean by requirements. But again, we were really lacking an understanding of what those requirements were for a piece of equipment. And we found that there were multiple RFP processes being used throughout the organization, or in a few cases, not being used at all. And like with value analysis, all key stakeholders were not identified or included in conversation. So what did we need to do to improve our RFP process? We needed to create a comprehensive RFP document ensuring all necessary data and information was being gathered and reviewed. We needed a centralized managing system of our RFP process, and we also needed a mechanism to track and summarize vendor responses, as I alluded to a little earlier with our product comparison and summary. So why is this all important for us to do? Just like with our value analysis process, we needed a process to help ensure the best clinical and financial decisions were being made. So I've spoken a little bit about our product comparison and summary. I took a couple little snippets out. It's a full workbook actually, but I took some screenshots of what are most important to us. So one of the first sheets that we have is our stakeholder analysis sheet. And this is where our template, we've already called out a good majority of the different departments that would be included in any type of trial or evaluation. We have purchasing, anesthesia, biomed, EDS, finance, legal or compliance. And so based on each request, we'll modify this list and we'll fill in the necessary information for each person. So who is the person that is representing that department? What is the description of how this piece of equipment or change of piece of equipment is going to impact the department, and to what extent, right? What's the level of impact? Is it just a low impact where, great, you just need to be made aware that this change is happening? Is it a medium impact because you support that piece of equipment, or is it a high impact because your staff or you touch that piece of equipment every single day? And then defining what's going to be our communication strategy. Are we going to send out emails? Are we going to have meetings? Are we thinking our cadence is weekly, monthly? You know, just defining what our communication strategy is to make sure everyone is staying up with the latest and greatest information as we go through the evaluation. Then towards the end, we start tracking some of those positive changes or those negative changes based on what they experienced in the trial. And ultimately then we're noting who their preferred vendor was. Then we kind of get into both the requirements and the financial aspect of it. So on the left-hand side, we have our clinical or business requirements. Again, it's just a sheet for us to start filling in information. Again, do you need a tablet? Do you need it to be of a certain bore size? Do you need the table to hold a certain weight capacity? And understanding for each one of those requirements, what is the priority of it? Is it a critical requirement, meaning that you can't proceed with this purchase without making sure that we absolutely meet that need? Or is it maybe a medium or a low priority? It's more of a nice to have. You don't really need it to do your actual day-to-day work. So first we outline those requirements. And as I stated, once an evaluation is done, we have that RFP information back. This is where we're filling out the total cost of ownership. So up top, we have our one-time costs, which speak to our capital costs. In the middle, we have our cost of service. So we're looking at the 5-year cost, excluding warranty period. And those things are going to be, your training. Are there any costs associated with your PM kits? Understanding from the vendors, asking the vendors, what have you experienced as being a major component needing to be repaired within the first 5 years or 6 years if you've got a 1-year warranty, so that we can start anticipating what that might be from our end. And then we gather a little bit of what is that labor rate. Again, we are an in-house biomed, but sometimes there are things that are just going to be beyond what we have the capacity, and we need that OEM to come in. So understand what's that labor rate so we know what to budget. And also understanding how close is your closest field service rep so that we can make sure that the clinical department has an expectation, especially when you're in in-house biomed program, your response time is barely anything, right? So understanding, is your closest rep within an hour drive, or is your closest rep in Chicago and, we need to account for an hour and a half, 2 hours for you to get up here? And that doesn't sound like a lot of time, but again, being in-house biomed, people get spoiled. They have a quick response time. So we want to make sure we're level setting that and taking that into consideration. Towards the bottom, we have some additional costs there. That's more so when we're looking at supplies or disposables, things like that we're evaluating. So not with, it's not associated with equipment typically. And then at the bottom, the very bottom, we have the total cost of ownership. So again, having a full financial picture of what this purchase means for the organization. It also allows us to see what those costs are and go back to the vendor to negotiate. So if we know that which vendor we want to go with, we're not going to go with just the pricing that they out of the gate provided us. We're going to go back. We're going to negotiate capital. We're going to negotiate the cost of service. We're going to negotiate as much as we can. But by having it all laid out here, it makes those conversations easier to have. So I'll stop there before I get onto the next screen about our results with RFP process improvement. But any questions on the product comparison and summary document? Okay. So some successes with this. And our success actually is our challenge as well. So shedding a little light on what we went through with our radiology group for selecting a new CT vendor. Our radiology group has done a wonderful job historically managing their own process. And they will do their research, and they will have their conversations, and they will do they'll lead the demos with the vendors, and then they'll make their decision on which route they want to go, and they secure the capital, and we call it a day. Putting the value analysis framework in place as well as the RFP process, it changed things for CT, right? It was no longer them in control of their individual process. And throughout the course of the process, naturally they were questioning it, right? It's different, and that's understandable, and that's okay. It was our job to remind them of why the new process was put into place. And most importantly, out of this trial and evaluation for a new CT vendor, we wanted to make sure we were staying open to the fact of it's not a perfect process yet, right? We're just starting to get in place. We're just a couple in. There are going to be lessons learned coming out of it. And you need to be willing to hear that feedback and take that feedback to improve upon your process so that you continue to grow and continue to meet the organization's needs. I will say, so that was a lot about challenges with this one, but I will say it was successful in the fact that we followed the process. Radiology was on board with trying out the new process. We were able to select a vendor. And what was wonderful about it at the end was one of the radiologist actually reached out to the vendor not selected and had a good conversation with them so that they understood why we didn't select them. And it's not a winner-loser mentality with that. It's more so being able to provide that feedback to any vendor of what doesn't work for your organization so that they can take that back to their developers and they can improve their product. And if vendors keep improving their product, you're just going to keep, improving the industry. So at the end of the day, while we did have some challenges, I consider CT one of our greatest successes of following the RFP process. So let's get into some of the committees that we've put in place for our organization. So as I stated earlier, we are fortunate to have leaders who are open and willing to have that conversation around our equipment. And a couple of years ago, we formed a capital value analysis committee made up of various leaders. We wanted to make sure IT, facilities, construction services, our PMO, finance, materials management were at the table, and we also include clinical leaders. We do rotate them, but we do include clinical leaders in those meetings. And our objectives with that committee were to generate and develop initiatives focused on reducing costs, develop and maintain asset management programs, and maintain our asset disposition program. So some ways we are able to achieve our objectives, going back to my earlier comment about how previously each department was responsible to request their capital dollars for replacements, we found out that not all capital was being requested, one, but we also found out that not all equipment that should be replaced in a given year was being replaced. And a lot of our equipment was beyond its useful life. So our replacement plans have provided us a means to clean some of that up. Great example is suction regulators. So I recognize, gentlemen, you should never ask a lady her age, but I will tell you I'm 42 years old. I started this role when I was 39. We had suction regulators that were older than me at that time. I think our oldest suction regulator was either 41 or 43 years old. So yeah, we had a lot of cleanup to do with that particular piece of equipment. So why is that though? Why do we have a suction regulator that's 41 years old? Really, when you look at it, clinical leaders have so many priorities to juggle. Unfortunately, their equipment sometimes becomes an afterthought, which lends itself to a reactive mindset. So what we did is we looked at our suction regulator inventory as a whole, and we got rather aggressive with our replacement schedule. We're looking to replace the majority of them in a 3-year span. And what we were able to do with this is we sat down with our vendor and we negotiated a multi-year agreement for better pricing. So there is definitely power in numbers. Leverage your volume, leverage your multi-year plan to negotiate better pricing. Improving planning and forecasting and budgeting. So vendors can play an important role with this work, and your partnership with them can prove beneficial for your replacement plans. We have a partnership with one of our vendors who assists us actually in developing and maintaining our 7-year cardiac patient monitoring replacement plan. We've worked with this vendor for a long time, and because we've worked with them for so long, they really do understand our organization. They understand how we use patient monitoring in our organization as well as telemetry, and they also understand our pain points. But they also understand their product, right? So we leverage our relationship and their knowledge to put together a plan that not only would meet the immediate need to replace hardware, but we also include the ability to be strategic in how we implement various technologies to keep us moving forward in the patient monitoring and telemetry space. So leverage your vendors and your relationships with them. It definitely helps improve our planning and forecasting. And consolidate your supplier base. So In late 2020, one of our main vendors approached us about an ultrasound health check service that they offered. It's vendor agnostic. It's a review of your entire ultrasound fleet, and at the end, they were going to provide us a report of their findings. When you would look at our ultrasound fleet, you could clearly see how much variation in manufacturer model we had. And we wanted to use this exercise with the vendor as an opportunity to start having conversations internally about standardization and right-sizing our ultrasound fleet. So how we went about this is, prior to their on-site visit, I worked with their team, providing them requested information of our ultrasound fleet. And we did it so that, number one, they had a good understanding of what the entire fleet looked like, right? They only were aware of what makes, models belong to them, but they didn't necessarily have breadth into everything else that we had. And we also wanted to minimize their time interacting with staff, because at this time we were already in the throes of COVID. But more importantly, too, we wanted to eliminate the potential of a sales pitch from occurring. I had leaders before they came on site. I had leaders call me up and say, Lonnie, are we going to get a sales pitch from them? And it was like, no, there are no sales pitches with this one. It truly is just an assessment of where we are. So then in January of 2021, vendor came on site. They gathered all their remaining data that they needed. And then shortly after that, they actually provided us the report out that they said they would. And based on the outcome of their visit, we actually fared a little better than industry average with the amount of variety we have, but there definitely were some improvements to make. And as we had hoped, it allowed us to start the dialogue internally. So what we decided to do is we had the vendor present to our senior leaders. We included directors, our VPs, and actually 3 senior executives that oversaw those departments. And essentially that meeting, that review with them allowed us to ask for their support in continuing our work of standardizing and right-sizing our fleet. So we were able to show them the information and get their buy-in to continue working on our initiatives and our goals. Unfortunately, with COVID and obviously organizational priorities, we haven't been as quick to put our action plans into motion with what that vendor provided us. But we have had an opportunity recently associated with our latest hospital opening, which was this past January, actually last month. So getting into that small win there, we would love, as an organization, we would love to get down to one sole ultrasound vendor. That's not reality, and we understand that that's not reality. If we can get down to 2 or 3 different vendors, we would be happy as a clam. So one area we'd like to try and switch vendors for is surgery. And we thought about doing this within the past year after we got the report out from that health check. But again, we were looking at our replacement plan. We knew that it would be somewhat of an uphill battle. I mean, what surgery has today, they're pretty in love with what they have. So that's going to be a challenge to get them to switch. And there were just so many competing priorities that we just knew right now wasn't the time to try and win them over with a different vendor. So Rob and I, we had our conversations around this, and we felt that our best option was to take the next 1 to 2 years and try and get some small wins within surgery without moving their, entire cheese and disrupting them entirely. So during this time, we also came up with a plan that would help our overall initiative as well as the new surgery department in our newest hospital. So going back to the leveraging numbers, your relationship building, some of those earlier concepts discussed, our former ICU manager and we had worked on a couple projects together, and we had a really good working relationship. So I looked at his inventory, and I actually found that he had at one of our ICUs 2 ultrasounds of the same make and model that surgery loves, and I needed to purchase for our new hospital. So I leveraged that relationship with him, and I explained to him what we were trying to do in the ultrasound space for both existing and new purchases, and asked if he was able or willing to have the providers, have his staff look at the different vendor for ultrasounds in the ICU. And he agreed to it. So we did our evaluation. Luckily for us, the providers and the staff really liked the product. So we went ahead and purchased those 2 new systems for them, which allowed us to redeploy their assets that are only 3 years old to our new surgery department. So again, it's a small win for us. We were able to get some standardization in our main hospital while still meeting the need of our surgery department, but rather than purchasing a net new ultrasound, we gave them one that is still relatively new, but we knew that we'd have the opportunity in the next couple of years to replace that, and hopefully at that point get them to switch over to the new vendor. Another committee that started recently is our clinical device integration committee. So in 2020, our informatics leadership was looking to get their arms around clinical device integration. They were seeing the demand for device integration increasing, but they also knew the hardware used for clinical device integration wasn't necessarily being replaced, and there certainly wasn't a replacement plan for it. Combine that with also nobody having a solid understanding of whether or not our existing infrastructure was able to support any of the new incoming requests. It was decided that we wanted to take a proactive approach and ensure that there's some oversight for device integration. Hence, the Clinical Device Integration Committee was formed in July of 2020. So informatics understood that some of the medical devices that we have device integration on are supported by Biomed. So they had actually reached out and asked if Biomed would co-chair the committee. So myself and one of the senior informaticists, we actually co-chair this committee. Our committee members are made up of, we have other informatics folks at the table. We have Biomed Rob is on that committee. We have our device integration specialist on that committee. We have purchasing. We have clinical leadership, a lot of clinical leadership. We also have IT to ensure from an infrastructure perspective, we have what we need, or we know what we need to do to support those requests. So our objectives with this committee are to develop, monitor, and maintain the strategy and infrastructure for clinical device integration, evaluate device integration offerings and associated infrastructure, recommend fleet replacements in support of EHR integration offerings, and also to provide advice and oversight for any requested device integration enhancement, issue, or deferred future functionality. So our work. We started out trying to understand current states. We wanted to fully understand what was already integrated, what wasn't integrated that we thought was actually integrated, the infrastructure currently in place. The folks really wanted to understand my methodology for replacement plans and the intersect my plans had with device integration, and what device integration requests were sitting out there waiting to be completed. From there, once we had a good understanding, we moved to put together a roadmap for various replacements, when they needed to occur or where they were already slated to occur. Again, my replacement plans, I have the next 5 years built out, so I know what years things are supposed to be replaced. We also wanted to keep track of future demands so we could make sure each piece of the puzzle was accounted for and the timing of it all made sense. And I'll actually show you what that plan looks like on the next slide. So next, we started to chip away at some of the action items. We put together our plan for replacing our capsule neurons, and we're actually in process with that work. During COVID, one of our clinical directors had reached out to me to see if we could integrate our vital monitors at the hospital. They really wanted to reduce the need for clinicians to go in and out of our COVID positive rooms. So in today's world, our vital monitors, we use the same model at our clinics and at our hospitals, which unfortunately does not allow for integration. So she and I have actually had quite a few conversations of how we want to achieve not only the vital monitor integration from my replacement perspective, but also from a device integration perspective as part of this committee. So we've started to talk through this in our committee to account for the work on our roadmap and to make sure we account for any infrastructure or connectivity needs associated with this. So we want to make sure that the infrastructure in place can support what we're looking to do. I've actually, based on the conversations too, started working my vital monitor replacement plan to account for only procuring new devices at the hospital. And those newer devices already at the hospital, I'm going to look to redeploy those to our clinics to replace their aging fleet. So again, it helps me understand what do I have at the clinics needing to be replaced. Rather than replace those, let's take what we have at the hospital and redeploy it, because we know we're going to swap out models there so that we can do our integration with vital monitors. So a good example of how there's an additional organizational goal or initiative that helps support my replacement plan and vice versa. Going back to my comment of wanting or needing some oversight for device integration, we recently started asking our leaders what clinical device integration needs or wants that they have. Essentially, we're asking them for their wish list, and we want to understand what they're wanting so we can help prioritize, implement, and support those solutions. So we've started gathering that list from our clinical leaders. And so we're going to take this next year to really vet them out and make sure we identify any and all infrastructure, EHR, training, any of those items that need to be in place are there to support their wish list. So again, this is small. I realize that, but here it kind of gives you just and it's a working document. So, but here it gives you kind of what our roadmap is. So we've outlined on the right-hand side on our monthly basis the next couple of years. Actually, it goes out further than my snippet. And on the left-hand side, then we understand. We've got our PACS, our AS OBGYN, CPACS, Epic, some of those integrations that we have in place. We're looking at our servers. So we identify when do we need to upgrade our servers or replace our servers, not only our servers, but what servers do we have in place that are not a ProHealthCare server from our vendor. And then we have a lot of our devices there mapped out for replacement. And we're looking at when are we planning for the replacement? When are we budgeting? When are we actually going to replace that piece of equipment? So again, a working document. We definitely have some improvements that we want to make with this, but it's a start for us to get a full picture of what it is we're trying to accomplish and to keep track of everything. So where do we go from here? Naturally, we want to expand our replacement plans. There's so many types of equipment, pieces of equipment not only needing to be replaced, but needing standardization. And leaders have really seen the benefit of our replacement plans. I can't tell you how many times, especially leading into the January to March timeframe when it's capital request season for us, how many leaders have reached out to me wanting to give me their equipment to own for replacement. Scope, endoscopy, cardiology has equipment that they want me to take on for them. So they've seen the benefits of the replacement plans we have in place and the processes we've lived through the last 2 years. And now they're at a point where they want to gift me more. So never out of work when you're dealing with capital planning. We also want to provide a proof of concept to the organization. And what we mean by that is we have other departments like you do as well that provide service and manage equipment, facilities, or IT as an example, who maybe aren't managing the replacement of their devices as proactively as what we are, what Biomed is. So if we continue to prove to the organization that replacement planning for medical equipment works, then really we've made our case for why it could work elsewhere within the organization. We can then give those departments the foundational tool, and then they're able to determine how best to implement and manage for themselves. So that is certainly a goal of Rob for us to get to in the next, I'd say, probably year. We've made some great strides with the work we've done, whether it be process improvement, right, with our centralized capital requesting, value analysis, RFP, or the value our committees are providing to the organization. There are always opportunities to improve. And in recent years, we have had quite a bit of improvement with the demand management processes led by our IT and PMO teams. And our organization always seems to have quite a few projects in flight involving construction services. We paused a lot of work during COVID, construction projects during work, and we're now at a point where everything, the faucet really just opened wide up, and we're reigniting some of those projects as well as what we already had planned. So a lot of remodel that's taking place. A lot of net new builds. So we're in process right now actually of building a new clinic, which we hope to open up in the next few months. And we're just wrapped up design for a new retail imaging clinic as well. So we do have some new locations up and coming. And also with my replacement plan, right? Not everything's plug and play, especially when you get into the imaging world. And even more so when you're switching vendors. So there is construction work necessary to support that piece of equipment recently purchased. So we've worked hard with construction services over the past few years to improve our processes with them and making sure that the right people are at the table at the right time. So a lot of good work there. So IT, facilities, construction services, just a couple to rattle off for who we'd like to improve oversight with over the coming years. And the last item that I have here, continue working with CMMS developers. I didn't touch on this in my presentation, but during my time with Biomed and HTM, I've been involved in conversations with a couple different vendors regarding the development of a capital planning tool. My boss, Rob, will tell you every day if he could how much I love spreadsheets. But to be honest, I would love nothing more than to get rid of how manual the replacement plans are. Every day I pretty much live in Excel. And while it is a great tool, it doesn't allow me to take in factors not already captured in our CMMS system for our pieces of equipment. And what I mean by that is understanding what are other organizations' experiences with a particular type of equipment or piece of equipment. Every piece of equipment has a life expectancy, right? But what's that real world average life that people are seeing? When are organizations seeing an uptick in repair costs for a particular device? Are they seeing it when you would anticipate, or are they seeing it actually in those first few years when really that piece of equipment should not have any issues? What is the average length between failures? What's the total maintenance cost for 5 years that other organizations have incurred? So having a system, an automated system, look at your equipment's data and mingle that with broader user-based information and put together a prioritized plan for you is definitely something that's on my wish list. And it's not because I don't love my work. I'm actually very happy with my work. I love my work. I wouldn't change it. But I understand that having more data and more information at our fingertips means that we're able to make more well-informed decisions, which ultimately help meet our organizational needs and goals. So some lessons learned. Change is difficult, right? People get set in their ways. They develop processes that work for them. And when they're faced with some change, sometimes they get scared, which is natural. It's something new. It's something unknown. Even when we're able to get someone on board with the change, they still may challenge it, and that's to be expected. So how can we make change easier? In all of our work discussed during this presentation, we first took time to clearly define what it is we wanted to accomplish. From there, we put together a plan for how to accomplish the change, and that included a strategic communication plan to keep people aware of the what, the whys, hows, and whens of that change. And so the lesson out of this is you're going to have far greater success with your change implementation if you first communicate it out and get people's buy-in before actually implementing the change. Another life lesson, lessons learned is life happens. None of us expected for the last 2 years to happen. COVID and supply chain issues have really impacted our work at ProHealthcare, as I'm sure with you all. Quickly, the focus shifted from the great work that we were doing to, what PPE do I need and how long did you say it's going to take to get that CAP system? So ProHealth is no different. And as I've mentioned, we've been able to fully implement some of our improvements. We haven't been able to fully implement some of our improvements due to everything that's occurred the last 2 years. But that doesn't mean that the work shouldn't happen or continue. We try and get those small wins where we can, knowing it will help lend itself to more success once we can fully implement our change and know that those small wins will actually make the change less difficult to implement. And lastly, timing is important. So going back to that surgery ultrasound story, coming off the ultrasound health check work, we were rather eager to start consolidating our ultrasound vendors, knowing we wanted to get away from a particular vendor we currently have in the surgery space. And looking at my replacement plan, I saw 2 to 3 ultrasounds in surgery needing replacement over about a 2-year period. So at first glance, could we have pulled together a trial and evaluation and hoping to get them switched over? Sure. But if we looked out a little further, which we did on my replacement plan, we saw we had probably 5 to 6 systems needing to be replaced over a future 2-year span. So what did we do? Rob and I, we had some conversation around this, and we thought if we were fortunate enough to get surgery to switch over, we'd only be replacing, those 2 or 3 out of their entire fleet. And knowing that we'd still have those 5 or 6 of the older model, we knew that there was a good potential that they would just use the old model more because it's what they're comfortable with. That's natural. So rather than jump to replace just a couple, we decided to hold off and put a strategic plan in place to increase the chances of them selecting our preferred vendor in the next couple years. And in the meantime, we hope to get some small wins. Again, the ICU and new hospital small win there. Another win was recently some of our cardiology anesthesiologists were looking for a new ultrasound. Theirs were up for replacement. And our cardiology providers, not the anesthesiologists, but our cardiology providers at our Heart and Vascular Center, they actually utilize our preferred vendor for ultrasound. So we took that information to the surgery manager to see if we could get the cardiology anesthesiologist to trial a model from our preferred vendor, and they agreed to that. And even more, they ended up liking the preferred vendor system over the one they currently had. So again, a small win. We're working our way into surgery, through the anesthesiologist to hopefully make that larger change for surgery easier. So